The impossible has happened. Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek freak, two-time MVP, the man who brought Milwaukee their first championship in 50 years, has officially been traded to the Toronto Raptors. You're probably thinking, Giannis would never leave Milwaukee. Yeah? Then explain this. When asked directly if he could win another championship in Milwaukee after their third straight first-round exit, here's what he said.
Do you think that you can still win that second championship here in Milwaukee after a third straight first-round exit?
Look, I'm not going to do this.
That's not just frustration, that's a superstar who's mentally checked out. So what really happened? How did the most loyal star in the NBA end up in Toronto? Let me break it all down. The shocking announcement that rocked the NBA. The basketball world has been completely and utterly turned upside down in what can only be described as one of the most seismic, earth-shattering, and absolutely mind-boggling trades in NBA history. The Milwaukee Bucks have officially traded their franchise cornerstone, their two-time MVP, their championship-winning superstar, Giannis Antetokounmpo, to the Toronto Raptors. This isn't speculation anymore. This isn't another wild rumor floating around social media. This is reality, and it's hitting the basketball community like a thunderbolt from the heavens. The signs of this inevitable conclusion had been building for months, particularly visible in Giannis's increasingly frustrated public appearances. When directly confronted about his championship prospects in Milwaukee following yet another devastating playoff exit, the emotional toll was impossible to ignore.
Do you think that you can still win that second championship here in Milwaukee after a third straight first-round exit?
Look, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I know how this going to, whatever I say, I know how it's going to translate. I don't know, man. I wish I was still playing. I wish I was still like competing and going back to Milwaukee. I don't know.
The raw pain and uncertainty in that response revealed everything about a superstar who had given his heart and soul to an organization, but could no longer envision a path to the championship success that drove him every single day. This wasn't just frustration with a single season's results. This was the accumulated weight of years of organizational limitations finally breaking through in the most public way possible. The announcement came through a bombshell X post from at Advanced Stats 23 that sent shockwaves reverberating throughout every corner of the NBA universe. The post detailed the absolutely massive trade package that has officially moved the Greek freak from Milwaukee to Toronto. The Bucks have traded Giannis and Kuzma to the Raptors for Scottie, Poltel, Dick, Ochai Agbaji, Jacoby Walter, Jonathan Mobgo, the 2025 number 9 pick, 2025 no, 39 pick, 2027 unprotected first round pick, 2029 unprotected first round pick, and a 2031 unprotected first round pick. Let that sink in for a moment. Giannis Antetokounmpo, the man who brought Milwaukee their first championship in 50 years, the player who transformed from a skinny teenager from Greece into one of the most dominant forces the game has ever seen, is now officially a Toronto Raptor. The magnitude of this transaction cannot be overstated, cannot be understated, and frankly, cannot be fully comprehended in the immediate aftermath of such a monumental shift in the NBA landscape. The basketball community had been watching these warning signs with growing concern, and many experts began openly discussing the inevitable conclusion that seemed to be approaching. The frustration with Milwaukee's situation had reached a boiling point, as one analyst perfectly captured the sentiment surrounding high-caliber players in unwinnable situations.
Like, you can't just keep having wasted years with a player that's that high caliber. So if it's not about championship and getting back to that level, then you gotta let him walk, and just let him walk respectfully too.
It goes back to decisions, man.
This perspective perfectly encapsulated the ethical dilemma facing Milwaukee. How long could they reasonably ask a player of Giannis's magnitude to accept competitive mediocrity? The notion of wasted years had become impossible to ignore, especially for a superstar entering his 30s with championship aspirations that seemed increasingly difficult to fulfill in his current situation. This trade represents so much more than just a simple player exchange. This is the culmination of months upon months of speculation, rumors, and whispered conversations in NBA front offices across the league. The mutual interest between Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Toronto Raptors had been reported extensively, with sources indicating that both parties had been quietly exploring the possibility of making this basketball marriage work. The writing had been on the wall for quite some time, though perhaps not everyone was willing or able to read it clearly. Reports from ESPN's Shams Charania indicated that for the first time in his career, Giannis was open-minded about his future and exploring the best fits outside of Milwaukee. This represented a seismic shift in mentality for a player who had previously shown unwavering loyalty to the organization that drafted him and believed in him when he was nothing more than a raw, unpolished prospect from the Greek basketball leagues. Even more telling was the assessment from ESPN's Stephen A. Smith, who had been predicting this outcome for months with characteristic certainty and insight. His analysis proved prophetic when he declared with absolute conviction,
"To me, there's no contemplation. Giannis wants out. It's just that you got a draft lottery coming up tonight. Let's see, what happens with that. Let's see who has what assets, et cetera, and where we're going to go from there."
This definitive statement, made months before the trade became official, demonstrated the level of insider knowledge and understanding that exists within NBA media circles. Industry insiders had been picking up on signals and conversations that suggested this trade was not just possible, but probable, well before it became public knowledge. The Toronto Raptors, led by their brilliant and visionary president Masai Ujiri, had been quietly positioning themselves for exactly this type of opportunity. Ujiri's long-standing admiration for Giannis dates back to the 2013 NBA draft, when the Raptors desperately tried to trade into the first round to select the Greek prospect. That missed opportunity had haunted the organization for over a decade, but now, through patience, strategic planning, and perhaps a little bit of destiny, they finally landed their white whale. The trade package itself tells an incredible story of just how desperately Toronto wanted to make this happen and how much value Milwaukee was able to extract in return. Scotty Barnes, the 2022 Rookie of the Year and rising star who many considered the face of the Raptors' future, headlines the return package. Barnes had previously shared a memorable interaction with Giannis during the 2024 All-Star Game, where he told Giannis that the Greek freak had inspired the Raptors' equipment manager to improve. Little did anyone know at the time that this casual conversation would be a precursor to them becoming teammates. Jakob Poeltl, the Austrian center who has been a defensive anchor for Toronto, provides the Bucks with immediate size and rim protection. His consistent performance and professional approach have made him one of the most underrated centers in the league, and his inclusion in this package demonstrates Toronto's commitment to parting with proven talent to secure their franchise-altering acquisition. Grady Dick, the promising young shooter who showed flashes of brilliance in his rookie season, represents the type of developmental talent that Milwaukee will need as they navigate this new chapter. His shooting stroke and basketball IQ suggest he could develop into a valuable role player or potentially something even more significant. Ochai Agbaji and Jacoby Walter add depth and potential to a Bucks organization that will now need to completely reimagine its identity and future trajectory. Agbaji brings NBA experience and defensive versatility, while Walter represents pure upside and the type of young talent that can be molded into whatever role the organization requires. Jonathan Mobgo rounds out the player portion of the package, adding another developmental piece to Milwaukee's suddenly youth-focused roster construction. But perhaps the most significant aspect of this trade package is the absolute treasure trove of draft picks that Milwaukee has acquired. The 2025 9th overall pick gives them immediate value in what's considered a loaded draft class filled with potential difference makers and future stars. This pick alone could net them a player capable of contributing immediately or serving as a valuable trade asset for additional roster construction. The 2025 second-round pick provides additional depth and the opportunity to take a flyer on a developmental prospect. However, it's the future first-round picks, unprotected selections in 2027, 2029, and 2031 that truly demonstrate the long-term thinking behind this transaction and the incredible value Milwaukee was able to extract. These draft assets address one of Milwaukee's most pressing concerns: their complete lack of future first-round picks until 2031 or 2032. The Bucks had essentially mortgaged their future in previous trades, including the deals that brought them Drew Holiday and Damian Lillard. Now, with this massive haul from Toronto, they've replenished their draft capital and given themselves the flexibility to rebuild or retool as they see fit. The unprotected nature of these picks is particularly significant, as it means Milwaukee will benefit from Toronto's potential struggles or successes, regardless of how the Giannis experiment works out. If Toronto struggles to build around Giannis, or if injuries derail their championship aspirations, these picks could become incredibly valuable. Conversely, if Toronto finds success, the picks will still provide Milwaukee with opportunities to add talent and continue building their foundation. Let's explore the intricate details of how this trade came together, examine the immediate and long-term implications for both franchises, and attempt to understand what this means for the broader NBA landscape. How this blockbuster trade became inevitable. to truly understand the magnitude and inevitability of this earth-shattering trade, we must examine the perfect storm of circumstances that made Giannis Antetokounmpo's departure from Milwaukee not just possible, but practically predetermined. This wasn't a sudden decision made in the heat of the moment. This was the culmination of mounting frustrations, organizational limitations, and a superstar's burning desire to add another championship to his legacy before Father Time catches up with him. The most recent and perhaps most devastating blow to Milwaukee's championship aspirations came in the form of their third consecutive first-round playoff exit. The Bucks were eliminated by the Indiana Pacers in 5 games, a result that sent shockwaves through the organization and left Giannis questioning everything about his future in Wisconsin. During the 2025 playoffs, despite Giannis posting absolutely incredible numbers, averaging 33.0 points, 15.4 rebounds, and 6.6 assists, the team simply couldn't advance beyond the first round for the 3rd year in a row. The statistical excellence that Giannis displayed during these playoff runs only served to highlight the fundamental problems with Milwaukee's roster construction. Here was a player performing at an otherworldly level, putting up numbers that would be considered dominant in any era of basketball, and yet his team continued to fall short when it mattered most. The disconnect between individual brilliance and team success became impossible to ignore, creating a sense of futility that permeated the entire organization. The basketball community had been watching these developments with keen interest, and many experts began to openly question whether Giannis's time in Milwaukee was coming to an end. The frustration with Milwaukee's organizational decisions became a focal point of criticism, particularly regarding their coaching changes and asset management.
Like, you fire the coach you won the championship with, right? It goes back, let's start there. For what? Right? Because guys don't like his approach. Guys don't like what we won with him, right?
Yeah.
That shit is wild to me. He had enough juice to win the championship.
You fire him, get another coach, and fire him halfway through the
go get rid of Drew.
This scathing analysis perfectly captured the organizational dysfunction that had plagued Milwaukee's decision-making process. The pattern of firing successful coaches and making questionable personnel moves had created an environment of instability that was particularly problematic for a franchise trying to maximize a championship window around a generational talent. The organizational challenges facing Milwaukee were numerous and seemingly insurmountable. The Bucks' payroll situation was described as top-heavy, with Giannis, Damian Lillard, and Kyle Kuzma accounting for a staggering $130 million of their $164 million total payroll for the 2025 to 2026 season. This financial structure left precious little room for roster improvements or the addition of complementary pieces that could push them over the championship threshold. The implications of this salary cap situation extended far beyond simple mathematics. With such a large percentage of their payroll committed to just 3 players, Milwaukee found themselves in a position where they couldn't make meaningful upgrades through free agency, couldn't take on additional salary and trades, and were essentially locked into a roster construction that had already proven insufficient for championship success. This created a vicious cycle where the team's limitations became more apparent each season, while their ability to address those limitations diminished correspondingly. The harsh reality of poor organizational decision-making was driven home even further when examining the consequences of past moves. The pattern of questionable choices had created a situation where Milwaukee was paying the price for years of mismanagement.
Then he go win a championship. Like, it's all, listen, those decisions, man, you gotta live with those. You make uncomfortable beds, you gotta get in them. Get you a pillow and a blanket, man, and get comfortable.
This philosophical commentary about living with the consequences of organizational decisions perfectly encapsulated Milwaukee's predicament. They had made a series of moves that seemed logical at the time, but had ultimately painted them into a corner where meaningful improvement was nearly impossible. Perhaps even more damaging was their complete lack of tradable assets and future draft capital. Milwaukee had essentially mortgaged their future in previous trades, leaving them without a first-round draft pick until 2031 or 2032. This meant that any attempts to improve the roster through trades or the draft were severely limited, leaving the organization in a state of competitive purgatory where they were neither good enough to contend for championships nor bad enough to acquire high-end talent through the draft. The absence of draft picks also meant that Milwaukee couldn't package future assets to acquire impact players, couldn't use picks as sweeteners and salary dump trades, and couldn't rebuild their depth through the most cost-effective means available available to NBA franchises. This lack of flexibility had been a concern for several years, but it reached crisis levels as Giannis entered his prime and the championship window began to close. The situation became even more dire when considering Damian Lillard's devastating Achilles injury. Lillard, who was expected to be Giannis's primary offensive partner, was anticipated to miss significant time in the 2025 to 2026 season due to the injury. This development left Giannis facing the prospect of carrying an even heavier offensive burden at age 30, something that recent playoff results suggested might not be sufficient for deep postseason runs. Lillard's injury represented more than just the loss of a talented player. It symbolized the fragility of Milwaukee's championship hopes and the narrow margin for error that small market franchises face when building around superstars. With Lillard sidelined, the Bucks would be asking Giannis to essentially single-handedly carry them to championship contention, a burden that even the most talented players in NBA history have struggled to bear successfully. Meanwhile, the Toronto Raptors had been quietly positioning themselves as the perfect destination for a disgruntled superstar. Under the leadership of Masai Ujiri, the Raptors had built an impressive collection of young talent and draft assets, systematically accumulating the type of resources that would be necessary to land a player of Giannis's caliber. Players like Scottie Barnes, who was being compared to Giannis himself in terms of versatility and potential, represented the type of foundational pieces that could be attractive in a trade package. The Raptors' approach to team building had been methodical and purposeful, with every move seemingly designed to position them for exactly this type of opportunity. Their willingness to be patient with young players, their success in player development, and their track record of making bold moves when championship windows opened had established them as one of the most competent and forward-thinking organizations in the league. The mutual interest between Giannis and Toronto had been simmering beneath the surface for quite some time. Reports indicated that Giannis preferred to stay in the Eastern Conference if he were to leave Milwaukee, and Toronto emerged as one of his top choices alongside Brooklyn. The Raptors' international appeal, stable front office, and proven track record of player development made them an attractive destination for a player of Giannis's caliber and global profile. Nonetheless, this trade represents far more than just a player changing uniforms. It signals a fundamental shift in how NBA superstars approach their careers, how organizations manage their assets, and how the league's competitive balance might be altered for years to come. The immediate aftermath and what this means for the future. The reverberations from this absolutely seismic trade are still being felt across every corner of the basketball universe, and the immediate aftermath has revealed just how dramatically this single transaction has altered the entire landscape of the NBA. As the dust begins to settle on what will undoubtedly be remembered as one of the most significant trades in league history, we're starting to understand the profound implications this move will have for both franchises, the Eastern Conference, and the broader competitive balance of professional basketball. The reaction from media personalities and NBA insiders has been nothing short of explosive, with many struggling to find adequate words to describe the magnitude of what has just transpired. The depth of analysis required to understand this trade's implications has prompted extensive discussions about the future of both organizations and the broader NBA landscape. When examining the specific circumstances that led to this moment, it becomes clear that Milwaukee's organizational challenges extended far beyond simple roster construction. The insights from industry analysts about the franchise's decision-making patterns revealed fundamental problems.
You got to be frustrated because it's looking like pointless years, and you don't want to keep doing that with a guy with his age and where he's trying to go in his career. So that's why I said for this summer, you got to figure out what the Bucks are really going to do.
This assessment perfectly captured the urgency and frustration that had been building around Giannis' situation in Milwaukee. The notion of pointless years resonated throughout the basketball community, highlighting the finite nature of athletic primes and the responsibility organizations have to maximize their superstars' championship opportunities. The prescient nature of Smith's analysis demonstrates the level of insider knowledge and understanding that exists within NBA media circles. Industry insiders had been picking up on signals and conversations that suggested this trade was not just possible, but probable, well before it became public knowledge. The ability to read between the lines and interpret the subtle indicators of player and organizational dissatisfaction has become a crucial skill in modern NBA coverage. For the Toronto Raptors, this trade represents nothing short of a complete transformation of their organizational trajectory and championship aspirations. The acquisition of Giannis Antetokounmpo instantly catapults them from a rebuilding rebuilding franchise focused on developing young talent into a legitimate championship contender in the Eastern Conference. The potential front-court combination of Giannis and Kyle Kuzma, alongside existing pieces like RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley, creates one of the most versatile and dynamic lineups in the entire league. The strategic brilliance of this move cannot be overstated when examining the long-term vision and patient execution required to position the organization for such an opportunity. Masai Ujiri has been building toward this moment for over a decade, dating back to his attempts to draft Giannis in 2013. The patience required to execute a plan of this magnitude speaks to the long-term vision and championship-focused mentality that has defined the Raptors organization under Ujiri's leadership. The psychological impact of landing Giannis extends far beyond the basketball court, as it validates the Raptors' approach to team building and establishes them as a destination franchise capable of attracting and retaining elite talent. This perception shift could have lasting implications for future free agency pursuits, trade negotiations, and the overall competitiveness of the franchise for years to come. From a basketball perspective, the fit appears to be absolutely perfect in ways that extend beyond simple talent acquisition. Giannis's versatility and ability to play multiple positions will allow Toronto to experiment with numerous lineup combinations and matchup advantages that could prove devastating to opposing teams. His presence immediately addresses their need for a true superstar player while maintaining the depth and flexibility that had made them such an intriguing young team before the trade. The addition of Kyle Kuzma as a complementary piece provides additional scoring punch and veteran leadership that will be invaluable during the inevitable growing pains of integrating such a significant new addition. Kuzma's championship experience with the Lakers, combined with his improved all-around game and leadership qualities, makes him the perfect bridge between Giannis and the existing Raptors core. The tactical possibilities that this roster construction creates are virtually limitless, with Toronto now possessing the personnel to play multiple styles of basketball depending on matchups and game situations. They can go big with Giannis at power forward, utilize him as a point forward in transition situations, or even deploy him as a center in small ball lineups that could overwhelm opponents with speed and athleticism. For Milwaukee, this trade represents both an ending and a new beginning wrapped up in a single transformative transaction. While losing a player of Giannis's caliber is never easy and will undoubtedly be emotionally difficult for fans and the organization, the return package they receive provides them with the foundation for sustained success moving forward. Scotty Barnes, the centerpiece of the trade, brings the type of two-way versatility and championship upside that made him such an attractive target. At just 23 years old, Barnes has already shown the ability to impact winning at the highest level, and his development trajectory suggests he could evolve into a perennial all-star caliber player. The psychological benefits of acquiring Barnes extend beyond his on-court contributions, as his youthful energy and upside provide Milwaukee fans with something to be excited about during what could otherwise be viewed as a rebuilding period. Barnes represents hope for the future and the possibility that the Bucks can remain competitive even without their franchise superstar. The supporting pieces in Jakob Poeltl, Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, and Jacoby Walter provide immediate roster depth and long-term developmental potential that addresses multiple organizational needs simultaneously. More importantly, the collection of draft picks, including the valuable 9th overall selection in 2025 and 3 future unprotected first-round picks, gives Milwaukee the flexibility to either accelerate their rebuild through additional trades or build organically through the draft process. Perhaps most significantly, this trade addresses Milwaukee's most pressing organizational need, the replenishment of their depleted draft capital. The Bucks had essentially mortgaged their future in previous trades, leaving them without meaningful assets to improve their roster. Now, with this massive influx of picks and young talent, they have multiple pathways to return to championship contention within a reasonable time frame. The broader implications for the Eastern Conference cannot be ignored or understated, as this single trade has fundamentally altered the competitive landscape and power structure of the conference. The addition of Giannis to an already competitive Toronto roster immediately shakes up the established hierarchy and creates new championship contenders that other teams will need to account for in their own planning processes. Teams like the Boston Celtics, Philadelphia 76ers, and New York Knicks will now have to account for a Raptors squad that features one of the most dominant players in the league, alongside a supporting cast that complements his skills perfectly. This could spark additional moves across the conference as other organizations scramble to keep pace with Toronto's upgraded talent level and championship aspirations. The ripple effects of this trade will likely be felt throughout the summer and into the upcoming season, as teams reassess their own championship odds and make corresponding adjustments to their rosters and strategies. The pressure to keep up with Toronto's new superstar-led configuration could drive additional trades, free agency signings, and organizational changes across the conference. The reaction from fans and analysts on social media has been particularly fascinating to observe and analyze. The initial shock and disbelief quickly gave way to detailed analysis of the trade's implications, with many questioning whether this signals a new era of aggressive team building in the NBA. The willingness of Toronto to trade away their young core, including a player many considered the face of their franchise's future in Scotty Barnes, demonstrates just how rare opportunities to acquire players of Giannis's caliber truly are. From Giannis's personal perspective, this trade provides him with exactly what he had been seeking throughout the deteriorating situation in Milwaukee: a fresh start with an organization committed to championship contention. His previous statements about wanting to be in the best long-term sustained winning environment appear to have been validated by this move. The Raptors' track record of player development, their 2019 championship pedigree, and their willingness to make bold moves to improve their roster all align perfectly with Giannis's stated goals and preferences. The financial implications of this trade are equally significant for both organizations and will have lasting effects on their respective salary cap situations and roster construction flexibility. Toronto now takes on the responsibility of Giannis's substantial contract, which includes his $54.1 million salary for the upcoming season and extends through the 2026-27 season, with a player option for 2027-28. However, the Raptors' salary cap situation provides them with the flexibility to build around their new superstar while maintaining competitive roster depth. For Milwaukee, the financial relief provided by trading away Giannis's massive contract gives them additional flexibility to make complementary moves and build around their new core of young players. The combination of financial flexibility and newfound draft capital positions them well for either a quick retool or a more patient rebuild process. Looking toward the future, this trade will likely be viewed as a defining moment for both franchises and could serve as a blueprint for how organizations approach superstar management in the modern NBA. For Toronto, it represents the culmination of years of strategic planning and asset accumulation, providing them with their best championship window since their 2019 title run. For Milwaukee, it marks the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new chapter built around young talent and future potential. The impact on Giannis's legacy cannot be understated either, as this move provides him with the opportunity to cement his status among the all-time greats. His move to Toronto provides him with the opportunity to add another championship to his resume while demonstrating his ability to succeed in different organizational contexts. If he can lead the Raptors to championship success, it would cement his status among the all-time greats while proving that his 2021 championship with Milwaukee wasn't a singular achievement, but rather the beginning of a sustained period of excellence. The narrative potential surrounding Giannis's journey from Milwaukee to Toronto is absolutely compelling from both basketball and human interest perspectives. Here is a player who gave everything to one organization, delivered them their first championship in half a century, and yet found himself in a position where staying loyal would have meant accepting competitive mediocrity. The courage required to leave a comfortable situation in pursuit of greatness speaks to the championship mentality that has defined Giannis throughout his career. The historical context of this trade also cannot be ignored when examining its broader significance for the NBA landscape. Rarely do players of Giannis's caliber, two-time MVPs in their prime, with multiple years remaining on their contracts, become available via trade. This type of transaction typically occurs only when organizational dysfunction reaches critical levels or when superstars force their way out through public demands. The fact that this trade happened through mutual recognition of an untenable situation speaks to the maturity and professionalism of all parties involved. The technical aspects of executing a trade of this magnitude also deserve recognition, as the logistical complexity of moving so many players and draft assets simultaneously requires extraordinary coordination between front offices, agents, and league officials. The fact that Toronto and Milwaukee were able to negotiate and execute such a comprehensive package demonstrates the high level of professionalism and competence that exists within both organizations. As the 2025-26 season approaches, all eyes will be on Toronto to see how quickly Giannis can integrate with his new teammates, and whether this bold gamble will pay immediate dividends. The pressure will be immense, with championship expectations following Giannis wherever he goes, but the potential rewards, both for the organization and for Giannis personally, make this one of the most compelling storylines in recent NBA history. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.